Welcome to the Professor Network. Today we have with us Dr. Christine Purdon, who is a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Waterloo. She is also the director of clinical training here. Dr. Purdon, thank you so much for being here and taking the time out of your day to do this.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Dr. Purdon, at the lab you run at UW, as far as I'm aware, you study anxiety, the various ways in which it manifests, and OCD. Mm-hmm. Could you tell me more about it and any current projects you may be working on?
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk about our work. So my work has sort of two branches. So one branch is anxiety, the other branch is OCD. They're absolutely related, but we're asking different questions. So with anxiety, we're really interested in trying to understand the development and persistence of problematic anxiety and the differences between what is normal anxiety, because we all have anxiety from time to time, and if we didn't, that would actually be quite problematic for us in lots of different ways. So we're trying to understand what is it that causes a small proportion of people to experience anxiety regularly and intensely on a regular basis. So that's one set of questions that we're asking. We're also interested in just understanding the basic anxiety response in general, because there's actually been surprisingly little research on what happens internally when people experience anxiety. So we actually have two projects going right now. One is looking at test anxiety, and the other one is looking at anxiety in general. And we're interested in finding out, particularly with test anxiety, just what is it? Because there's not been a lot of clarity about what it is and what's different about somebody who has a lot of test anxiety versus somebody who's just anxious about a test. So we're doing some interviews with people just to find out what they say. So looking at people who describe themselves as really test anxious, to the point where it really interferes with their ability to do well, and people who get anxious about tests but are able to still do well on their tests. So we're just trying to understand a bit what's different about them. In the other study on anxiety in general, we're really interested in understanding how anxiety presents itself inside your mind. And for a lot of people, they end up doing like kind of a dialogue, so they'll be working away and then suddenly they'll get almost like a voice that says, oh, you are so stupid, you did not do this well, and now you're going to fail. And then they talk back to that voice and it sort of becomes this dialogue, and nobody's actually ever studied that before. So we're really interested to know what is that, how many people sort of experience their anxiety that way? And if it is a dialogue, then maybe we could help people think about who is the voice of anxiety, who is that person in your head, and how can we help you better respond to them in a more assertive way, perhaps. So those are two projects on anxiety that we're doing right now. Something else that we just sort of wrapped up was looking at where people, when they're anxious, are they more likely to, where do they look when there's threat present? So are they more likely to attend to threat? Do they have trouble getting their eyes off of threat, et cetera? So we just wrapped up a whole series of studies on that, which were really cool. And we had a tarantula where we had people who were scared of spiders come, and we looked at, how often they looked at the tarantula and how much that interfered with performance on another task. And so that was kind of cool stuff. So my research, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. Go ahead if you have more.
So I was just going to say, with obsessive compulsive disorder, we're really interested in understanding the compulsion part of things right now, because again, there's been very little research on compulsions, a lot of research on obsessions, but less so on compulsions. And so in my lab, we have like a little kitchen, and it has it looks like you walk in and you think this is somebody's kitchen, but it has cameras that above the sink and facing out from the sink, and it has a camera above the stove and facing out from the stove. And so we can have people who have difficulty with hand washing, or people who have difficulty with needing to check things, come in and do little tasks using the stove or getting their hands, quote, dirty. And we can study what are the factors that cause them to, people who are either high in contamination fears or high in checking concerns, what is it that prolongs that behavior versus people who like, because we all wash our hands, we all check the stove. So what is the difference between people who have a problem with it and people who don't? So those are sort of the main thrusts of our work right now.
That's ridiculously interesting. I know I would love to hear more about it later. But what sparked the interest? Why anxiety? Why this disorder?
Yeah, it's such a good question. When I started my graduate studies way back now, I was going to study depression, and I worked with somebody who was a major expert in Canada on depression, still is. And, I was looking and reading in the literature, and there's a very huge literature. And he came to me and he said, Christine, there's this really interesting question of intrusive thoughts, that people, when they're anxious, get intrusive thoughts. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. So I started looking into that. That got me really interested in what's happening in people's heads when they're experiencing a particular emotion. And then I just kind of went off in the direction of anxiety. And I find that, of course, everybody experiences anxiety. Everybody experiences anxiety that can be problematic for them at times. And so it struck me as a really interesting universal experience where we could look at a normative response that can become really problematic for people. And so I think that's what really sparked my interest.
That's incredible. You're also the director of clinical training at UW. What does that entail?
So at University of Waterloo, we have a PhD program in clinical psychology, and that program is accredited by the Canadian Psychological Association. And my role as director of clinical training is to ensure that our program functions in adherence to the standards of the Canadian Psychological Association, and so is in compliance with the accreditation standards. So I oversee the coursework that students do, as well as the nature and breadth of their clinical training. And so you may know that we have our Center for Mental Health Research and Treatment in the building, in the PAS building. And that's a service, and if I could just make a plug, that's a service that's available to anybody on campus or off campus, and we have low-cost services. And that's where our students do their clinical training for the most part. They do offsite practica for sure as well, but they do, so in our center, what we do is provide students with the assessment and psychological treatment under supervision, and that forms the main basis of their clinical training. So my job is to just kind of make sure that our students are getting the training they need to become tomorrow's excellent clinical psychologists.
Well, thank you for telling me about that. Finally, we have some questions submitted by students, and this one in particular I think is particularly pertinent right now. In the light of COVID, a lot of students are concerned that RA opportunities, which are so vital if you're thinking of going to grad school, are going to be harder to come by now that everything's remote. What's your opinion on this?
I get that, and so pivoting to the big difference in pivoting to remote studies is that we don't need people in the room to run a study anymore. And that's where I know a lot of people get their legwork for research, their exposure to research for doing that. And so it is an unfortunate missed opportunity for now, and hopefully that it won't be forever, and it'll just be for now. So I do think there are lots of roles for RAs, though, and we just love our RAs. We value them so much. I think that the roles can shift a little bit. It can be in terms of assisting the professor in doing the pivot to the online delivery, like assisting with Qualtrics. But then also there's a lot of work to be done after data is collected. So assisting with getting it into SPSS or whatever statistical program the students and professors are using, doing things like helping with recruitment, helping with cleaning data, like getting data into good shape. I think also this is something that I would like to have more support with from RAs, and it would be things like doing literature searches and providing like little reviews of the existing literature, because I find sometimes that, as a professor, sometimes I can get so busy that I get a bit out of touch with what some of the most recent stuff is that's relevant to my work. So I think there are lots of ways, and I think it's up to us as well as professors to try to find ways to engage RAs. But I do think there are lots of different roles. It's just a little bit different. And so what I would recommend to students who are looking for research is to absolutely approach people whose work interests them and just say that they're willing to provide assistance in the pivot to online, they're willing to provide assistance into file management or whatever it is that the professor needs. And I think that we just need to kind of rethink, and I think we'll be able to start finding RA positions again. It's just been such a sudden and abrupt shift that we all have to rethink how we do everything, but it'll come back on board.
I think my main takeaway from that is not to be too worried, because while things are changing, there will still be so many more opportunities to get involved with the amazing psychology department we have here at UW.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for talking to us. This has been incredible, getting to know your research and your work, and we're very grateful you did this.
Thank you for the opportunity. Good luck with everything.